From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
If any of us had any doubt that Trump's regime has declared an open war, an open season on all immigrants in this country, that doubt should have evaporated by now.
Sweeping new guidelines to more aggressively detain, deport undocumented immigrants have been drafted by Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly. We'll speak to a lawyer from the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project and the reporter from McClatchy who first reported on the DHS memos. Then, 75 years ago this week, Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, authorizing the internment of Japanese Americans. We will speak with the legendary actor George Takei of Star Trek fame, who grew up in a Japanese American internment camp.
But without charges, without trial, without due process, the fundamental pillar of our justice system, we were summarily rounded up, all Japanese Americans on the West Coast.
And then with Exxon's former CEO, a Secretary of State, and a Goldman Sachs alum heading up to the Treasury, we'll look at the many ways corporate America has benefited from Trump's first month in office.
We have all kinds of people coming in from corporate America, billionaires, huge contributors, and they're going to rule on matters that directly relate to corporate interests, their own personal interests, whether or not they have are going to be transgressing the conflict of interest rules.
We will speak to Robert Weissman, a public citizen. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Juan Gonzalez. Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly has drafted sweeping new guidelines to speed up the mass deportation of undocumented immigrants currently living in the United States. The memos instruct federal agencies to begin hiring 10,000 more immigration and customs enforcement agents, as well as 5,000 more Border Patrol agents. They also detail plans to accelerate deportation hearings and to expand the number of people prioritized for removal from the United States. McClatchy is reporting hundreds of thousands more undocumented immigrants in the United States would be subject to what's known as expedited removal proceedings to quickly get them out of the country. According to McClatchy, children who arrived in the United States as unaccompanied minors would no longer be protected against deportation, and their parents would be subject to criminal prosecution if they paid human traffickers to bring their children across the border. President Trump says he's also preparing to sign a new executive order banning people from 7 majority Muslim nations from entering the United States, although White House officials say the new travel ban will not include people with green cards or visas. A Seattle judge refused to order the release of 23-year-old Daniel Ramirez Medina, who was arrested by ICE agents even though he has permission to live and work in the United States under President Obama's Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program known as DACA. Ramirez's supporters rallied outside the hearing on Friday. This is Paul Quiñones with the Washington Dream Act Coalition.
If any of us had any doubt that Trump's regime has declared an open war, an open season on all immigrants in this country, that doubt should have evaporated by now. With Daniel's arrest, we have seen the federal government breaking its promise and shown that it cannot be trusted.
We'll have more on the Trump administration's crackdown against immigration and immigrants currently living in the United States after headlines. 2 members of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus say Republicans forced them to leave a meeting with immigration and customs enforcement officials on Thursday. Illinois Democratic Congressman Luis Gutierrez and California Democratic Congresswoman Norma Torres prayed for immigrant families after they were thrown out of the meeting with ICE's acting director, Thomas Homan, about the recent wave of ICE raids. Gutierrez later said, quote, "In 20-plus years, I have never heard of the Republicans controlling what meetings Democrats can have with officials of the executive branch, and never had a staffer ask me to leave a meeting to which I am entitled to attend," unquote. President Trump continued to escalate what he calls his war on the media during his 2020 campaign rally in Florida on Saturday, only one day after he tweeted that the media is, quote, the enemy of the American people, unquote. This is Trump speaking in front of a crowd of almost 7,000 in Melbourne, Florida.
Thomas Jefferson, Andrew Jackson, and Abraham Lincoln, and many of our greatest presidents fought with the media and called them out, oftentimes on their lies. When the media lies to people, I will never, ever let them get away with it. I will do whatever I can that they don't get away with it. They have their own agenda, and their agenda is not your agenda.
In fact, while Jefferson often criticized the press, he also believed it was fundamental to democracy, famously writing in 1823 to the Marquis de Lafayette, quote, the only security of all is in a free press, unquote. Trump lied or misrepresented statistics repeatedly during Saturday's campaign rally, including claiming credit for jobs that were created under the previous Obama administration, once again exaggerating the U.S. crime rate, and lying that refugees admitted to the U.S. are not vetted when, in fact, they are vetted in an extensive process that takes 2 years. During his speech, Trump also appeared to invent an imaginary terrorist attack in Sweden.
Here's the bottom line. We've got to keep our country safe. You look at what's happening. We've got to keep our country safe. You look at what's happening in Germany. You look at what's happening last night in Sweden. Sweden. Who would believe this? Sweden.
This comment sparked widespread ridicule and criticism, including from former Swedish Prime Minister Carl Bildt, who tweeted, quote, Sweden? Terror attack? What has he been smoking? Questions abound, unquote. Trump later said his Sweden comment was in response to a Fox News story he'd watched the night before about alleged refugee-related crime. Sweden's crime rate has fallen over the last decade, even as it has accepted hundreds of thousands of refugees, including from Syria. Trump's rally in Florida came as he faced harsh criticism throughout the day on Saturday from Arizona Senator John McCain and others after he tweeted Friday night, quote, the fake news media, failing New York Times, NBC News, ABC, CBS, CNN, is not my enemy. It is the enemy of the American people, unquote. This is Senator McCain speaking to Chuck Todd in an interview on NBC's Meet the Press.
A fundamental part of that new world order was a free press. I hate the press. I hate you especially. But the fact is, we need you. We need a free press. We must have it. It's vital. If you want to preserve, I'm very serious now, if you want to preserve democracy as we know it, you have to have a free and many times adversarial press. And without it, I'm afraid that we would lose so much of our individual liberties over time. That's how dictators get started.
That's Arizona Republican Senator John McCain. Journalists and editors also condemned Trump's comments. Gabriel Sherman, the national affairs editor at New York Magazine, called it, quote, full-on dictator speak. Fox News anchor Chris Wallace said Trump's comment crosses an important line. Anti-Trump demonstrations continue nationally and worldwide as thousands of protesters took to the streets across the U.S. over the weekend. In New York City, activists flanked by a marching band and carrying a casket staged a New Orleans-style mock funeral for the presidency. In Washington, D.C., LGBT protesters kissed each other outside Trump's hotel to protest the anti-LGBT policies of his administration. Crowds also took to the streets in Chicago, Dallas, Minneapolis, along the U.S.-Mexico border, and in Los Angeles to oppose Trump's crackdown against immigration and immigrants currently living in the United States.
Well, the fact that my mom is an immigrant currently, and I just feel like I need to do this for her so that she gets the rights she needs, because this whole time she's working hard to provide for us, and of course she is part of this country just like all of us, and I'm here fighting for her and my father.
The weekend's protest came after Friday's coordinated day of action, billed the February 17th general strike, saw as many as 100 demonstrations across the United States. Organizers with the group Strike for Democracy say as many as 100,000 people participated nationwide. In Britain, as many as 10,000 people are expected to join an anti-Trump protest today as the British Parliament holds a debate on whether to cancel President Trump's state visit to Britain. Nearly 2 million Brits have signed on to a petition calling for the visit to be cancelled. This is British Parliament member Tulip Siddiq.
This is a man who has tainted the Muslim communities of 7 different countries with the same brush. If we allow Donald Trump into our country on a state visit, what kind of message are we sending to future generations? History will judge us if we allow this man to come to our country without asking him questions first.
In Spain, as many as 160,000 people took to the streets of Barcelona Saturday to demand the Spanish government admit more refugees. This is Mira Zarur, a Syrian refugee living in Barcelona.
People could help us to forget the pain we feel because we miss our loved ones in Syria. Think of us as people, not as a crisis. We are not a crisis, and we didn't come here to steal people's houses or their jobs. We came here to live in a secure place because Syria is not safe.
Back in the United States, Scott Pruitt was sworn in as director of the Environmental Protection Agency Friday after the Senate voted 52-46 to confirm him. His confirmation came despite fierce opposition from environmentalists, Senate Democrats, and members of the EPA itself, who say they fear Pruitt will suppress scientific findings and undermine their work, and that the Trump administration might even seek to abolish the EPA entirely. As Oklahoma Attorney General, Pruitt sued the EPA 14 times. His confirmation and swearing in came only one day after a district judge ordered Pruitt's former office to reveal thousands of pages of correspondence with oil, gas, and coal companies. Trump met with 4 possible candidates for National Security Advisor over the weekend. Former Ambassador to the United Nations John Bolton, Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster, Lieutenant General Robert Caslen Jr., and retired General Keith Kellogg, who is currently serving as acting National Security Advisor. The meetings came after General Flynn resigned from the post last week over his December phone call discussing sanctions with the Russian ambassador, and Trump's top pick for his replacement, retired Vice Admiral Robert Harwood, turned down the position, reportedly telling a friend the offer amounted to a S sandwich. Trump's search for Flynn's replacement comes as the White House remains dramatically understaffed. A New York Times investigation reports Trump has struggled not only to fill his cabinet, with 6 members still unconfirmed, but also to fill the important positions of deputy secretary, undersecretaries, and assistant secretaries for most agencies. The Times reports one of the key barriers is that Trump has been vetoing new people and even firing existing officials who have been at all critical of him. On Friday, for example, Craig Deere, the recently appointed head of the National Security Council's Western Hemisphere Division, was fired and marched out of his office less than 24 hours after he criticized Trump's policies on Latin America during a private talk at the Wilson Center in Washington, D.C. Deere is one of 6 top officials within the State Department who have been fired recently over concerns about loyalty. Trump's 2 sons, Eric Trump and Donald Trump Jr., attended the grand opening of the Trump International Golf Club in Dubai Saturday night alongside their business partner, Dubai billionaire Hussein Sajwani. The golf course is the first of a series of high-profile developments that Trump's businesses, which are now run by his adult sons, are slated to open during his time in office, posing potential conflicts of interest. This is Donald Trump Jr. speaking at Saturday's opening.
Thank you very much. It's incredible to be here looking up at this amazing building after all these years. So, Hussein, thank you very much for the friendship, for the partnership. Ali, Abbas, Mehdi, thank you very much. Look forward to doing and working with you for many years to come.
In Somalia, a suicide car bomb killed at least 39 people and injured about 50 more after it exploded in a market in Mogadishu on Sunday. This is one of the witnesses.
Half of I was very shocked today as I saw people crying in pain and others lying on the ground wounded. Others were already killed by the car bomb which exploded at the center of the market. Those injured and killed were shopkeepers, pharmacists, and butchers.
No group has claimed responsibility for the attack, although Somalia's president has blamed the militant group al-Shabaab. In Iraq, U.S.-backed Iraqi forces launched a campaign to retake western Mosul from ISIS on Sunday as the U.S. increased airstrikes against the militants in the city. Human rights groups are warning of extreme risk for the 650,000 civilians in the western half of the city. The campaign to retake Mosul began in October. Iran's foreign minister has warned the United States not to send more ground troops to Syria, following a CNN report that said the Pentagon is considering a plan to deploy a large conventional force to Syria. Iran has been backing Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, while the U.S. has been targeting ISIS, while supplying some training and support to forces fighting Assad. In an interview with CNN's Christian Amanpour, Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif said more U.S. troops in Syria would fuel extremism.
I believe the presence of foreign troops in an Arab territory against the wish of the government and the people of those territories is in and of itself a recipe for these demagogues, these extremists, to rally behind and to gain new support and to recruit new fighters who are disenfranchised youth, who have been deprived of their dignity because of certain policies that have been followed.
And in Munich, Germany, more than 1,000 anti-NATO activists demonstrated outside the Munich Security Conference, where U.S. Vice President Mike Pence and other top leaders were gathering. The protesters demanded an end to what they called the war economy. As many as 4,000 officers were deployed to police the protest. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Juan Gonzalez. Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly has drafted sweeping new guidelines to more aggressively detain and deport hundreds of thousands of undocumented immigrants. The memos instruct federal agencies to begin hiring 10,000 more Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents, as well as 5,000 more Border Patrol agents. McClatchy is reporting hundreds of thousands more undocumented immigrants in the United States would be subject to what's known as expedited removal proceedings to quickly get them out of the country. According to McClatchy, children who arrived in the United States as unaccompanied minors would no longer be protected against deportation, and their parents would be subject to criminal prosecution if they had paid human traffickers to bring their children across the border. Homeland Security Director Kelly has signed off on the memos, but White House officials say they are not official yet. Well, for more, we're joined by two guests. Franco Ordonez is a White House correspondent for the McClatchy Washington Bureau. His latest article is DHS Chief Proposes Prosecuting Parents of Children Smuggled into the U.S. And Tim Warden-Hertz is the Directing Attorney for the Tacoma office of the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project. Welcome, both of you, to Democracy Now! I'd like to begin with Franco Ordonez. Tell us about these memos that you uncovered and what specifically they say.
They're pretty amazing. I mean, as you pointed out, they dramatically increase the number of immigrants who could be targeted for deportation. Essentially, they wipe away many of the prosecutorial discretion, many of the protections that President Obama had put in place. And as you noted, many of the children who were unaccompanied minors, if they arrived here and were reunited with a parent, and the White House says it's about 60% of them do, they may not get those same protections after they're reunited with their parents. And the parents themselves, they could face they could face prosecution because the way the White House sees it, or at least according to these memos, these draft memos, they are aiding and abetting human traffickers by paying them to bring their children over. So many more people would be targeted. The idea is that the expedited removal would be incredibly expanded. Currently, it's about 2 weeks you can expedite remove someone. This order says that it would be 2 years. So we're talking tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of people could be removed very quickly, according to these orders.
Now, what does it mean? The White House is claiming that these are only drafts, yet the Homeland Security Secretary has signed off on them. Can you explain the difference in the definition here?
It's a great question. It's the same question that I had for the White House. I was actually talking with the White House last night about that. And the way that the White House explained it to me is essentially these orders are, quote unquote, the final cut of the Department of Homeland Security. However, they apply to the Donald Trump's executive order. Therefore, they have the final say. And according to the White House, they had some questions. They had some issues with some of the language. They didn't say what specifically. They wouldn't give me the details, but that they are working with the Department of Homeland Security to kind of iron out those differences, do their due diligence. You got to remember, as you pointed out, we've had so many protests. The travel ban was blocked by the Seattle federal judge. I think they're trying to be a little bit more careful, and they don't want that type of they don't want that experience again. And I can assure you, I've talked to lawyers in the advocacy community, and they're getting ready to fight this as well.
And there also seems to be some confusion, Franco, doesn't there, about how this would affect the DACA, the young people, in terms of new policy. Could you explain that as well?
Sure. DACA. So these proposals do specifically, or these orders specifically do say that DACA is protected. However, that hasn't calmed people's concerns so much because, one, in other parts of the order, it also says that there will be no protected class. And these orders also go on to say that they expand the definition of who is a criminal immigrant. Not only do you have to be convicted of a crime, you could be charged with a crime. You can actually also be believed to be committed a crime. So it's a wide swath of people who could be targeted. DACA is mentioned. However, there are some conflicting statements there also. Also, we've all seen some of the leaked reports about potentially ending DACA. So there's still, big question marks out there about DACA.
Well, the new DHS memos come on the heels of Friday's arrest of Daniel Ramirez Medina in Washington state. Ramirez has permission to live and work in the United States under President Obama's program, DACA, or Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. His arrest alarmed immigrant communities who fear the Trump administration could soon target other DACA recipients. This is Paul Quinones of the Washington DREAM Act Coalition.
If any of us had any doubt that Trump's regime has declared an open war, an open season on all immigrants in this country, that doubt should have evaporated by now. With Daniel's arrest, we have seen the federal government breaking its promise and shown that it cannot be trusted.
Well, also joining us from Seattle is Tim Warden. Hertz is the directing attorney for the Tacoma office of the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project. Welcome to Democracy Now! Could you tell us about the situation with the arrest of Mr. Ramirez on Friday?
That's right. Well, on Friday, the judge in Seattle ordered that Mr. Ramirez remain detained in the Tacoma Detention Center, and right now we're focusing on trying to ensure that his constitutional rights are protected. He, like you discussed, he has no criminal record at all. He's been twice applied for and been vetted and been granted protection under the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, and despite that, he was picked up by immigration officials.
But why are they holding him then? If he is protected under DACA, what are they alleging?
Well, at this point, they haven't put forward any evidence. I think there have been some statements that they've made regarding possible gang membership. Again, I think we, Mr. Ramirez, and we certainly dispute that. And as I mentioned, there is absolutely no evidence of that, given. And in fact, in the filings that we submitted to the court in Seattle, there is evidence of even some fabrications of evidence regarding that.
What are your concerns about not only what the Trump administration has done so far, but now the word of these memos that Secretary Kelly has signed off on how that could affect undocumented immigrants or people who are or DACA recipients? What are your main concerns?
Yeah, I mean, I think you touched on some of them. I think that, and I think Mr. Ramirez's case actually is a good example of sort of the lack of process that we may be seeing sort of expanded under this administration. So I think the expansion of expedited removal is certainly one piece of that. I think it is dramatic, as you mentioned, up to 2 years of having been in the United States. But I think it goes even further than that, because the memos discuss, having to prove to the satisfaction of an immigration officer that you've been in the United States for 2 years, or else you're subject to this expedited removal where you're deported without a chance to even have a day in court. I think about that, if I were pulled over, I'm not sure if that I could prove, right, that I've been in the United States for 2 years, just based on what I have in my wallet. And so, I think that there's a lot of these other pieces, whether it's that or whether it's hearing programs held at remote county jails or prisons, or the protections being taken away for unaccompanied minors that again really chip away at the chance for people to even have a process to figure out whether or not they might have protections under the laws that exist.
Well, if you could explain more clearly to folks who are not familiar with immigration law, on this expedited removal situation, how the changing of the definition affects so many more people, because wasn't it before this, you had to have been found within, 100 miles of a U.S. border or have been in the country less than, was it 2 weeks or 2 months, and now they've expanded it to 2 years? Explain the difference.
That's right. Yeah. So the existing regulations around that, I think stem from 2002. They limited the use of expedited removal to folks who are found within 100 miles of the border and within 2 weeks of having entered the United States. So there's that sort of time and location limitation on expedited removal. And again, what these memos would do would remove that, and so it would leave anyone in the United States subject to expedited removal unless they could prove to the satisfaction of the immigration officer who's arresting them that they've been in the United States for more than 2 years. So it takes away any geographic limitation and then creates at least a hugely expanded and again, like I mentioned before, maybe not even that limited 2-year temporal limitation.
And Franco Ordonez, I'd like to ask you, you have a new article that talks about how many of these policies were foreshadowed by a memo that the now sitting Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, sent to the Obama administration last year. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, this is. I just talked with the White House yesterday about it too. I got a hold of this letter that you're referring to that Jeff Sessions wrote in July 2016, and it basically outlines two of those most controversial points that we were talking about earlier. Jeff Sessions, in his letter, talked about the 60% of parents. The 60% of unaccompanied minors who come to the United States who eventually end up meeting with their parents who are here illegally. And he specifically questioned then Secretary Jeh Johnson and then Attorney General Loretta Lynch why they were not being, quote unquote, according to them, humanely removed from the country. He also in those letters pointed out that their parents were subject to prosecution. So I think what it shows is that this is not out of the mainstream thinking of the Trump administration. Not only is Jeff Sessions, as you pointed out, our current Attorney General, but Stephen Miller, who was a big part of these executive orders, he was part of Jeff Sessions' staff. So this has been part of the thinking for a while. I'll just add, when I did talk to the administration last night, they said, look, these policies are things that law enforcement has been asking for. So I think we're going to get some clarity pretty soon on those things. But yeah, this is not necessarily, new stuff, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
And something else that's not new is the existence of a deportation machine. As you have said in some of your articles, haven't you, that Trump doesn't need to create a deportation machine because the Obama administration already did that?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, we can't forget that Obama, for many years, deported more people who were in the country illegally than any other president. It was up through 2012, 2014 that he was doing this. You mentioned Luis Gutierrez earlier getting kicked out of that meeting. I think that just shows what kind of fight is ahead. Luis Gutierrez went after President Obama a few years ago, calling him a deporter-in-chief. So Obama kind of set the stage in some ways. Trump has kind of taken that and taken it on. I think a lot of us were curious whether he would do take away some of the prosecutorial discretion that he did. But Trump has definitely taken further steps, much further, in potentially going after some of the unaccompanied minors and particularly their parents. So I think it's going to be very interesting.
And finally, Tim Warden, Hertz, your organization, the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project, what are you gearing up for now in the coming months? What kind of efforts are you going to be making in terms of immigration reform or attempts to beat back what is coming from the Trump administration?
That's right. Yeah, I think there's a lot of different pieces that we're working on. I mean, we are part of the litigation regarding the Muslim ban, and if there's any new orders, we certainly would be looking at challenging those. I think, as was mentioned earlier, I think regarding these new draft memos, I think there's policies in there that we believe are unconstitutional and that we would also be looking to challenge. I think beyond that, we're also doing a lot of pushing communities. I mean, the fear that these memos and that the rhetoric coming from the administration have created in communities, both among folks who are undocumented and folks who are documented, has been immense. And, I've been doing outreach around the state, as have many other folks in our organization. And the fear is really hard to overstate. I had a question the other day from a woman who was talking about her husband, who's had a green card for 14 years. They're from Mexico, and she said that they'd planned a trip in next month to go visit family in Mexico. And she was wondering whether or not it would be safe to do so, whether or not, she's a U.S. citizen, he has a green card, whether or not they could even leave the country and expect to be allowed back in. I think they should be. And I think that the fear that creates is immense, and so we're working on different levels, both representing people in immigration court, trying to help folks stop it as much as they can in each case, and also doing community education as well as litigation just to stop it on a systemic level.
Well, okay, I'd like to thank both of our guests for being with us, Tim Warden Hertz of the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project and Franco Ordonez of McClatchy Newspaper. Thanks for joining us. When we come back, the legendary actor George Takei on the 75th anniversary of FDR signing Executive Order 9066, authorizing the internment of Japanese Americans. Stay with us. James Brown's Funky Drummer, featuring the drummer Clyde Stubblefield, who passed away February 18th at the age of 73. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. I'm Juan Gonzalez. 75 years ago yesterday, on February 19th, 1942, Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066 that forced more than 120,000 men, women, and children of Japanese descent into internment camps. This included nearly 70,000 who were American citizens.
States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. As Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy, I have directed that all measures be taken for our defense.
Over the weekend, Day of Remembrance events were held across the country to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the internment of Japanese Americans. Many people are asking if history can repeat itself. On the campaign trail, Donald Trump explicitly called for a Muslim registry, and as president, he has attempted to ban refugees and travelers from 7 majority Muslim nations. In an interview with ABC in 2015, Trump defended his proposal for a total and complete ban on Muslims entering the United States and compared it to the actions of FDR.
What I'm doing is no different than what FDR's solution for Germans, Italians, Japanese, many years ago.
So you're for internment camps?
This is a president who was highly respected by all. He did the same thing. If you look at what he was doing, it was far worse. I mean, he was talking about the Germans because we're at war. We are now at war.
Well, our next guest says one of the darkest chapters in American history has begun to repeat itself. We're joined by George Takei, the legendary actor and gay rights activist who grew up in an internment camp. He is best known for playing Hikaru Sulu on Star Trek. Takei's Broadway show Allegiance screened in cinemas across the United States on Sunday, the Day of Remembrance. It is about the internment of Japanese Americans inspired by the true story of Takei and his family's experience. George Takei, welcome to Democracy Now!
Good to be here.
Well, we've had you on the show before, but could you talk about your own family's experience and what you went through as a young child as a result of the internment policies that FDR brought into effect?
Well, as a matter of fact, yesterday, which we, as you said, considered a day of remembrance, I remembered my childhood imprisonment at the home of the man who put us behind those barbed wire fences, Franklin Delano Roosevelt's home at Hyde Park. I spoke on my memories there, and I spoke about that morning when my parents got me up very early that morning, together with my brother a year younger and my baby sister, still an infant, dressed us hurriedly, and my brother and I were told to wait in the living room while they did some packing back in the bedroom. And so the two of us were just gazing out the front living room window, and we saw 2 soldiers marching up our driveway, carrying rifles with shiny bayonets on them. They stomped up the front porch.
And this was where?
This was in Los Angeles.
Los Angeles. Mm-hmm.
On Garner Street, a 2-bedroom house. And they began pounding at the front door with their fists. It was a terrifying sound. My father came out, answered the door, and literally at gunpoint, we were ordered out of our home. My father gave my brother and me little packages to carry, and we followed him out onto the driveway and waited for our mother to come out. And when she came out, she had our baby sister in one arm and a huge duffel bag in the other, and tears were streaming down her face. And this I told to a packed house audience at the Roosevelt Library on the 1,000-plus acre estate of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. It was a strange feeling.
And your family was eventually interned where?
Well, we were first taken to the horse stables at Santa Anita Racetrack. We were taken there in a truck with other families that had been rounded up, and there they herded us over to the stable area, and each family was assigned a horse stall, still pungent with the stink of horse manure to sleep in. Mm-hmm. For my parents, it was a degrading, humiliating experience to take their 3 children and arrange the cots for us to sleep in. I was a 5-year-old kid then, and for me, the perspective was totally different. I thought it was kind of fun to sleep where the horses sleep. So my childhood experiences were quite different from my parents' pain and anguish and the humiliation and the degradation and enragement that they went through for over 4 years.
And I seem to recall it was not only the obviously the liberal president Roosevelt who backed this policy, but also wasn't Earl Warren, who was then the Attorney General, the famous later Supreme Court Justice. He was also very much stoking anti-Japanese phobia throughout California, wasn't he?
Earl Warren was an ambitious man. He wanted to run for governor, and he saw that the single most popular political issue in California at that time was the Lock Up the Japanese movement. And I'm using the long word for Japanese. Mm-hmm. It was an ugly 3-letter word. And he made an astonishing statement as the Attorney General, the top lawyer of the state. He said, "We have no reports of spying or sabotage or fifth-column activities by Japanese Americans." And that is ominous. The fact that there is no report. He said, the Japanese are inscrutable. You can't tell what they're thinking behind that placid face. And so it would be prudent to lock them up before they do anything. So for this Attorney General, the absence of evidence was the evidence. And he fed into the hysteria, the war hysteria of that time, and reached all the way to President Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
And so how long was your family interned?
For over 4 years. We were taken from the horse stables to the swamps of Arkansas, and we were imprisoned there, barbed wire fence, sentry towers, guns pointed at us, for about a year. And then, initially, after Pearl Harbor, young Japanese Americans rushed to their recruitment centers to volunteer to serve in the military. This act of patriotism was answered with a slap on the face. They were denied military service and categorized as enemy aliens. We were neither. We weren't the enemy, and we weren't aliens. We were born, raised, educated in the United States, mostly on the West Coast. And so with that outrage, we were put into these barbed wire prison camps. But a year after imprisonment, after they completely took everything away from us, they realized there is a wartime manpower shortage. And here are these young people that they categorized as enemy aliens. How to justify drafting them? So they came down with, of all things, a loyalty questionnaire. And it was put together in the most sloppy, ignorant way. The most egregious question was question 28. It was one sentence with 2 conflicting ideas. In essence, it asked, will you swear your loyalty to the United States of America and forswear your loyalty to the Emperor of Japan?
Well, the issue of loyalty, obviously, is now front and center in terms of some of the Trump administration policies. And in November, a Trump PAC spokesperson defended the proposed Muslim registry by citing the Japanese internment camps.
Japanese American.
Japanese American. Yes. This is Carl Higbee of Great America PAC speaking with Fox News' Megyn Kelly.
We did it during World War II with Japanese, which, call it what you will, maybe wrong.
You're not proposing we go back to the days of internment camps, I hope.
No, I'm not proposing that at all, Megan. But what I am saying is that we need to protect America.
That's the kind of stuff that gets people scared, Carl.
Right. But I'm just saying there is precedent for it, and I'm not saying I agree with it, but in this case, I absolutely believe that a regional base...
You can't be citing Japanese internment camps as precedent for anything the president-elect is going to do.
Look, the president needs to protect America first, and if that means having people that are not protected under our Constitution have some sort of registry so we can understand, until we can identify the true threat and where it's coming from, I support it.
That was Carl Higbie of the Great America PAC, a pro-Trump PAC. The correlation between some of what happened then, and as you're saying, this was against many Japanese Americans, but of what's happening now with Trump and the Muslim ban.
The very fact that he brought that up to justify whatever the plans that they have for Muslim people is shows that he's not learned the lesson of the internment of Japanese Americans. Because if he's really learned that lesson, if he has studied that, he would know that the lesson is we must never do that again. Ronald Reagan apologized for it in 1988 and pledged a $20,000 token redress for that. $20,000. Which totaled up to $1.6 billion. This man, Higbie, is totally ignorant of that. We must not do it again. And the fact that he brought it up shows his ignorance.
But there were some people who were targeted for internment who resisted. You talk about the Korematsu case and what that meant and how the courts reacted at that time.
Well, they did challenge it. After they were imprisoned, not just Korematsu, but Gordon Hirabayashi and an attorney named Min Yasui. They challenged it all the way to the Supreme Court. In 1944, the middle of the war, they were denied justice. They failed. But after the war, in the 70s, they challenged it again. The finding of the Supreme Court. They all went all the way up to the federal court, and the federal judge found that there was a fault in the original ruling. But they covered up those words by calling it by its Latin name, coram nobis, fault in the original ruling. And the government didn't appeal that to the Supreme Court, so it ended there. But it was a fault in the Supreme Court's original ruling, and it should never happen again.
And then it took an act of Congress later on in terms of reparations for the Japanese Americans?
Well, that was when Reagan apologized. In 1988, Congress passed the Civil Liberties Act, and there was this $20,000 token redress paid. They went in the order of the age of the recipient, and I didn't get mine until 1991, and it was the letter of apology was signed by George H.W. Bush with George H.W. Bush on the $20,000 check.
And talk about your decision. I mean, you've been very much of an activist much of your life, but your stance now in terms of what's going on with the Trump administration and why you feel it's so important to speak up now?
Well, on so many issues, not just the Muslim travel ban, but issue after issue. It has been a failure, but this president is delusional. He just made that statement last week that his administration is operating like a finely tuned machine. He doesn't realize the disaster that his administration is, the failure of the attack in Yemen, and the series of failures that he's a danger. You know, the real terrorist is Donald Trump. Donald Trump is the terrorist president of the United States, and his rating is going down, 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 and he still talks about the fantastic support that he's been getting. We are going through an incredible time in American history.
Well, I want to thank you, George Takei, legendary actor and activist. Thank you for joining us. And when we come back, Robert Weissman of Public Citizen on corporate Trump. Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. James Brown with Clyde Stubblefield on drums. Stubblefield passed away Saturday. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. I'm Juan Gonzalez. There's been a wholesale corporate takeover of the government. That's the conclusion of a new report coming out today by the watchdog group Public Citizen. The report looks at how corporate America has benefited from Trump's first month in office. Rex Tillerson, the former CEO of Exxon, is now Secretary of State. Goldman Sachs alum, now serves several top posts. Steve Mnuchin as Treasury Secretary, Steve Bannon as Trump's chief strategist, and Gary Cohn as Director of the United States National Economic Council. Trump has also signed executive orders to help undo the Dodd-Frank Wall Street reform law and repeal rules requiring financial advisors to give advice based on their customers' best interest. Last week, President Trump bragged about his plans to cut regulations across all industries.
We're cutting regulations, big league. We are really cutting them by massive amounts. The auto industry just left a week ago. They were here in the same room, and they are very happy with what we're doing, and everyone is. I think just about every. The financial industry, we're having a lot of the different industries in, and we're cutting regulations in just about every industry. In fact, I can't think of any that we're not.
Joining us now is Robert Weissman, president of Public Citizen. Welcome to Democracy Now!
Hey, Ron, good to be with you.
Well, talk to us about this month that's transpired here in terms of what's happened with corporate America.
It's really been astounding, and I think to some extent it's been overlooked as people are rightfully outraged about the Muslim ban, threats to the First Amendment, whatever kooky thing Trump has said today, the mix over Russia. But the real straight theme through the administration, this is through the first month, and we should expect it for the entirety of this administration, is bestowing gift after gift after gift on corporate America. We have by far the most corporate cabinet in the history of the United States. And of course, you only mentioned a few of the many people coming from the corporate class into the administration. We have the president consorting with chief executives and corporate leaders nonstop. First thing he did on his first working day was meet with corporate executives. He sat down with the CEOs of the auto industry, big pharma, the airline industry. Each time he leaves and says, we're going to cut regulations on you, which means we're going to free you of the restraints on health and safety and worker rights and let you profiteer without restraint. He has signed a series of executive orders designed to dismantle the Affordable Care Act, to undo Dodd-Frank, and to make it virtually impossible to issue new regulatory protections for Americans, meaning we're going to see more unsafe food, more dirty air, more dangerous autos, more dangerous drugs on the market, reduced protections for workers on the job, whether it's health and safety or overtime rules or prevention against wage theft, and on and on. When he says he's deregulating every industry in America, he means it. And it's been a remarkable gift from the administration to corporate America. We've seen an amazing amount. He can take credit for that, I suppose, in the first 30 days, and there's a lot more to come. And then you add on to that, of course, all of the corruption around his personal businesses, and we see a kind of kleptocracy coming together with corporatization of the government that is absolutely unprecedented in our history. Well,
I wanted to ask you about the reducing regulations, what I call, I guess, his 2-for-1 executive order. Getting for every one executive order you produce, you've got for every one regulation you produce, you've got to get rid of 2 more. Could you talk about that and how that's going to affect rulemaking?
Yeah, it's sort of laughably stupid, except it's actually in place, and it's going to seize up all rulemaking to protect health and safety, consumer interests, and workers. The executive order says that for every new rule adopted, an agency has to do 2 things. They have to look at the cost of the new rule and offset it by costs they're going to eliminate from existing regulations. And for every new rule they adopt, they must eliminate at least 2 existing rules. So, for example, if the Car Safety Agency wants to adopt a new rule on brake safety, they're going to have to get rid of rules on headlights and steering columns. Absolutely utter lunacy. unless your only goal is to make it impossible to do any new regulation, which is, in fact, the objective of the executive order. Now, we think this executive order conflicts with a whole range of existing statutes because, for example, the Environmental Protection Agency's job is, under the Clean Air Act, is to advance clean air. It's not, and when they do rulemaking, they're supposed to look at a particular issue, not try to offset it against other existing costs. And that's true across the government. So we have sued, along with the Natural Resources Defense Council and the Communication Workers of America, we've sued the administration saying this executive order violates a number of statutes and violates separation of powers. So it's both illegal and unconstitutional. And we hope we can get this thing struck from the books because it will mean no new protections for Americans during the course of the next 4 years, assuming he's in office that long.
Well, Robert, Politico has obtained leaked audio of Trump speaking in November to members of his Bedminster, New Jersey golf club. He welcomed club members to stop by while he interviewed potential cabinet picks.
Tomorrow we're here and Sunday we're here. We're going to be interviewing everybody. Treasury. We're going to be interviewing Secretary of State. We have everybody coming in. And we're going to have, and I don't know if you want to come around, but if you want, it's going to be unbelievable. It's going to be an unbelievable day. So you might want to come along.
This whole idea, whether that's at his club there or Mar-a-Lago, the ability of the members to be close to him while he's making these so-called decisions, have access to him.
Right. So it's another piece of this astounding corruption. That tape and then new reports from the New York Times about Mar-a-Lago make very clear that he's at his clubs where people pay to be members. In the case of Mar-a-Lago, now $200,000 a head for an initiation fee. At his clubs, he mingles with the members. Well, they're not regular people. And he asks them for advice, or they offer advice on their own. So you have this direct access to the president based on ability to pay and prior relationships with him that is absolutely unprecedented. There is one example, though, that stands out above all the others, which is Carl Icahn, who's an old friend of the president's, who has been named his special regulatory advisor. He's not an actual government employee, but he has this special, at least according to the administration, he's got this special advisory role. And he's reportedly had a decisive impact over choosing who would lead the Environmental Protection Agency and the Securities and Exchange Commission, the two parts of the government that most directly relate to his business empire and his investment empire. And, of course, we've got a guy running the EPA who is as hostile to the agency as is possible, who's sued it 14 times and aims to destroy it. And we've got a guy nominated to run the Securities and Exchange Commission.
We've got about 10 seconds more. Go ahead.
Who is very likely to adopt rules that will benefit the giant investor, Carl Icahn himself.
Well, Robert Weissman, President of Public Citizen, thanks for joining us. That does it for today's show. I'm Juan Gonzalez. Thanks for joining us for another edition of Democracy Now!